The wind rolled over the open prairie like a restless spirit, carrying with it dust, cold, and the bitter whisper of a life Charlotte Hale never thought she'd be forced to endure. Only 32 years old, she already wore the world like a heavy cloak, one stitched together from loss, fear, and a stubborn will that refused to yield. She had buried her husband the year before, a quiet rancher with gentle hands but a weak heart, and since then, her life had been a long chain of days filled with chores, worry, and responsibility she never asked for. The cabin they lived in, once warm with laughter, now stood like a solemn reminder of the life she had before fate turned cruel. Yet Charlotte kept moving, kept trying, because she wasn't alone. 3 people depended on her: her 8-year-old son Daniel, her 5-year-old daughter Gracie, and her elderly mother-in-law Margaret, whose failing eyesight and unsteady legs made her as vulnerable as a child. They were her world, and no matter how poor or tired she became, she would protect them with her last breath. Winter had been unkind that year. The cattle she managed were thin, the fences broken by storms, and the soil dry under a sky that rarely gifted rain. Money was a luxury she no longer knew. And food, well, food was now a matter of careful rationing, measured down to the last grain, the last scrap. Still, Charlotte never complained. She simply worked harder, prayed more, and hoped spring would bring a miracle. On a frigid evening, while Daniel was gathering firewood, and Charlotte was busy tending to the last of their stew, a strange sound reached her ears. Not the cry of an animal, not the crunch of snow under her son's boots, but a low, pained groan, drifting from somewhere past the clearing. It was the kind of sound that carried danger right alongside desperation. Charlotte froze. Out here, far from town and surrounded by silent fields, unexpected noises usually meant trouble. Outlaws, riders with bad intentions, someone running from something or toward something worse. Her instincts told her to barricade the door and ignore it, to keep her family safe behind wood and iron. Then the sound came again, weaker this time. A man's voice, a man in agony. Her heart clenched. She knew she shouldn't go. She knew the risk. Yet Charlotte Hale was not the type of woman who could turn away from suffering, even when she barely had anything herself to give. She told Daniel to stay inside and keep the door locked. She took her lantern, wrapped her shawl tightly around her, and stepped into the icy wind. The groan came again, leading her toward the edge of the property where the land dipped into a shallow ravine. Snow crunched under her boots as she moved closer, lantern light flickering across the frozen ground. And then she saw him. A man lay sprawled beside a collapsed horse, his clothes torn, his body bloodied as though he'd fought both men and the wilderness. His face was half buried in snow, skin gray, lips trembling from cold. Charlotte rushed to him, turning him gently so he could breathe easier. His breath was shallow, ragged. His pulse was weak. One leg was twisted unnaturally, and the side of his shirt was stained dark with dried blood. He was dying. Charlotte's first thought was simple terror. Who was he? Why was he out here? Was he an outlaw? A fugitive? A man who brought danger behind him like a shadow? But as she looked at him, really looked, she didn't see danger. She saw a human being on the brink of death, and she could not leave him. With a strength she didn't know she still had, Charlotte dragged the stranger inch by inch up the snowy incline, stopping only when her arms trembled and her breath burned. It took nearly an hour to reach the cabin, and by the time she stumbled through the doorway, she was shaking with exhaustion. Daniel's eyes widened in fear, but Charlotte told him firmly, "Help me, sweetheart. He'll die if we don't." They laid the man on her bed. He was burning with fever now, mumbling broken phrases between shallow breaths. Charlotte worked quickly, heating water, cleaning his wounds, setting his leg with trembling hands. She stitched the gash on his side with the care of a woman who had learned from necessity, not training. She fed him broth, drop by drop, and changed the cloth on his forehead through the night. Hours passed. The cabin was cold, despite the fire, and her children huddled together on the floor, watching with frightened eyes. Her mother-in-law muttered prayers under her breath. But Charlotte didn't stop. She couldn't. She didn't even know his name, only that he was alone, suffering, and needed someone to choose mercy over fear. When dawn arrived, painting the horizon in shades of rose and gold, the stranger finally stirred. His eyes opened, piercing blue, though heavy with pain, and he whispered something barely audible. "Why, help me?" Charlotte just looked at him, her voice gentle but tired. "Because you needed saving." He tried to speak again, but darkness pulled him back under. Yet Charlotte saw something before he faded, a look of bewildered gratitude, as though no one had ever risked anything for him before. She didn't know then that the man she had rescued was Elias Ward, a wealthy rancher known across the region. A man with enemies, a dangerous past, and a fortune that could change her family's destiny. Charlotte only knew one thing that night. She had saved a dying stranger. And she had no idea that this single act of mercy would one day circle back, not just to repay her, but to save her entire family forever. The next 2 days passed in a haze of fever, snow, and whispered prayers. Elias Ward, though Charlotte still did not yet know his name, drifted in and out of consciousness like a man caught between two worlds. Sometimes he muttered broken fragments of sentences, things that sounded like names, places, warnings. Other times he fell silent for long stretches, his breaths shallow, his skin pallid. Charlotte hovered between hope and dread with every rise and fall of his chest. She had taken in wounded animals before, a horse with a broken leg, a fox caught in a trap, even a hawk with a shattered wing, but never a full-grown man, especially one who looked as if life had thrown him through hell and expected him to crawl back out on his own. There was a hardness to him, even in unconsciousness, the sharp set of his jaw, the scars that crossed his forearms, the roughness of a man who had fought more battles than he could count. Yet there was something else there, something unexpected, a vulnerability so deep it almost frightened her. This man was not a monster. He was not an outlaw. She could sense it in the small details, the calluses that spoke of honest work, not thievery, the sturdy boots that were well worn but expensive, the way he flinched in his sleep as though remembering things he wished he could forget. Charlotte knew danger when she saw it, but she also knew good men. Her late husband, Joseph, had taught her how to read people with quiet observation. And something about this stranger, no matter how bruised, broken, or battered, told her he was not the type to harm an innocent family. But the world outside her cabin did not care whether a wounded man was good or bad. Snowstorms kept rolling in, trapping them in isolation. Food grew even scarcer. Each day, Charlotte had to decide how much broth the stranger got, how much the children would eat, and how much she herself could sacrifice without collapsing. She often chose herself last. On the morning of the third day, as she prepared a thin soup of beans and what little meat remained, she heard a hoarse, cracked voice behind her. "Where am I?" Charlotte turned. The stranger was awake, truly awake, for the first time. He gripped the edge of the bed, as if the world were still spinning around him. Sweat glistened on his brow, but his eyes were sharp, alert despite the pain. "You're in my home," Charlotte said gently. "You were hurt, badly." He blinked, confusion shadowing his features. Who are you?" "Charlotte Hale," she replied. "This is my family's cabin. You collapsed on my land." He tried to sit up, grunting with effort, but Charlotte quickly pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Don't move. Your leg is broken, and your stitches need time." He exhaled shakily, eyes drifting around the small, worn cabin. His gaze softened briefly when he saw Daniel and Gracie peering at him from behind a table, their young faces tense with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Margaret, the elderly woman, gave him a cautious nod. "How long?" he asked. "3 days," Charlotte said. "You were barely alive." He stared at her for a long moment, as though trying to understand why a stranger would go to such lengths for him. "You saved my life." Charlotte only shrugged lightly. "You needed help." He absorbed this silently, but Charlotte could see the weight of those words sinking into him, deeper than he let show. Later, when she brought him broth, he forced himself to drink, even though every swallow seemed painful. His fingers trembled. His breathing remained uneven, but the fever had broken. A good sign. "What happened to you?" Charlotte finally asked when he finished. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the stitched wound along his ribs. "Ambushed," he said finally. "3 men, hired guns. They wanted what's mine." He paused, then added, "Almost succeeded." Charlotte felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "Why were you alone?" He let out a dry laugh, low, humorless. "Because trusting the wrong people nearly got me killed, and trusting no one wasn't much safer either." She didn't press further, but she could feel the truth humming beneath his words. This was a man used to danger, and someone, somewhere, still wanted him dead. Over the next hours, he drifted in and out again, though less often now. Charlotte stayed close, tending to him as snow piled outside the windows. The fire crackled low, the children whispered quietly, and the cabin felt smaller than ever. That night, as Charlotte checked his bandages, he watched her with an intensity that startled her. "You gave me a chance I didn't deserve," he said quietly. She met his gaze, confused. "Everyone deserves a chance." "Not everyone believes that," he murmured. There was something haunting in his eyes then, something sharp enough to pierce the walls she'd built around her own heart. But Charlotte forced herself to keep her distance. This man was a stranger, a dangerous one, and her family depended on her judgment. Still, when she looked at him, bruised, broken, yet fighting, she couldn't help but feel a strange tug of fate, as though something bigger than either of them had placed him there. A dying man had landed at her doorstep, a man who clearly carried enemies in his shadow, a man whose survival could change everything, for better or worse. Charlotte didn't know his name yet, didn't know the story behind his scars, didn't know the world this man came from. She didn't know that his ranch was one of the largest in the territory. She didn't know that he had no family left, but land worth fighting over. She didn't know that enemies hunted him still. All she knew was this: she saved him. And somewhere in the space between her compassion and his desperation, something had shifted. Something quiet, something intense, something that would lead them both into a future neither could see yet. For now, the stranger slept again, breathing steadier than before. But his arrival had awakened a storm that had nothing to do with weather. And that storm was coming for Charlotte next. The storm outside had finally quieted, but inside Charlotte's cabin, a different kind of tension lingered. Quiet, watchful, growing with each passing hour. Elias slept less and spoke more now. His fever was gone. The color had begun to return to his face, and strength returned to his voice little by little. Though he was still far from recovered, the life that Charlotte had dragged back from the edge of death was clearly a life that had once commanded rooms, land, men, and respect. It showed in the way he carried himself, even injured, in the steadiness of his gaze, in the authority behind his words, in the scars that mapped a life far rougher than most men survived. But it was what he didn't say that unsettled her the most. For 2 days, Charlotte had sensed a truth circling them like a wolf, just outside the light of the fire. She wanted to ignore it, to pretend she had saved a simple traveler, a ranch hand, someone who would heal and move on. But the truth pressed harder with each moment. He was not ordinary, and nothing about him ever had been. On the morning of the 5th day, she found him sitting up for the first time, staring quietly out the frost-covered window. His posture was stiff with pain, but his eyes, steady, alert, and too intelligent for a man hiding anything simple, were clear. "You shouldn't sit up yet," Charlotte warned gently as she brought him a cup of hot tea. He took it with a grateful nod. "I've laid still long enough. My body's rested, my mind less so." Charlotte folded a blanket over his lap. "You're safe here. Whoever hurt you can't find you." He looked at her then, really looked, with something like gratitude, and something like regret. "I never meant to bring my troubles to your doorstep," he said. "And what troubles are those?" she asked carefully. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he rubbed tiredly at his jaw, his fingers grazing an old scar beneath his ear. Charlotte had noticed it earlier, a faded knife cut, long healed. There were more scars too, on his arms, his ribs, his back. These were not the marks of a ranch hand or a simple traveler. These were the marks of a man who had survived things most men didn't. Finally, he said, "My name is Elias Ward." Charlotte blinked. The name carried weight. Even someone as isolated as she was had heard it before, whispered in the mercantile, mentioned by passing travelers, spoken with a mix of awe and rumor. Elias Ward was the owner of Ward's Bluff, a massive spread of land stretching for miles. A rancher known for his wealth, and even more for the enemies he'd made, simply by existing in a world where power invited danger. "You're that Elias Ward?" she whispered. He gave a slight, humorless smile. "I'm afraid so. Though I doubt I look like the man people talk about." Charlotte swallowed hard. "Why were you alone? A rancher like you should have men with him." "I did," Elias said quietly. "But the men who attacked me, they weren't strangers." He let that hang in the air. Daniel, listening from the table, leaned in closer. Gracie stopped drawing on the floor and crawled nearer. Even Margaret paused her knitting. Charlotte waited. Elias took a slow breath. 6 months ago, 2 brothers, the Connell boys, started buying up land around mine. Small lands at first. Then they came after my cattle, my water rights. They tried to buy my ranch outright, and when I refused, his jaw tightened. They hired men, good killers, and they've been trying to push me off my land ever since. Charlotte's heart thudded painfully. You mean, this was no random attack? No, Elias said. This was the 3rd attempt. Silence fell heavy in the cabin. Charlotte's first instinct was fear, not for herself, but for her children. She had taken in a dying man, yes, but she had not known she was bringing in a man with enemies powerful enough to spill blood without hesitation. Perhaps Elias sensed her worry, because his expression softened. Charlotte. His voice was gentle. If I had known I'd been ambushed so close to your land, I would have dragged myself in any other direction. I never would have let danger touch you. She wanted to believe him, and something inside her did, instinctively, fiercely. What were you doing out there alone? She asked. Trying to find proof, Elias said. Proof that the Connell brothers were stealing my cattle and using forged documents to claim parts of my land. I'd gotten too close. They realized it, and so they sent men to silence me for good. He paused, staring down at his hands, strong hands, now trembling faintly. If you hadn't found me, he said quietly, I'd be dead. Charlotte sat beside him, her eyes narrowing with determination. You survived. That's what matters. Elias looked up at her, something unreadable flickering in his blue eyes. You're not afraid of me? No, she said simply. If you wanted to harm us, you wouldn't be sitting here thanking me. He huffed a breath, half laugh, half disbelief. You're a rare woman, Charlotte Hale. She ignored the warmth rising to her cheeks. And now that you're awake, what will you do when you're strong enough to ride? I'll go home, Elias said. Face what's mine. Protect what I have left. Then he added, softer, but I won't forget what you did. Ever. Charlotte didn't know why those words affected her so deeply. Maybe because no one had spoken to her with such sincerity since her husband died. Maybe because Elias looked at her like she was something more than a widow struggling to keep her family alive. Maybe because his gratitude wasn't just gratitude. It was a promise forming itself silently in his eyes. A promise she didn't yet understand. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. Snow drifted past the window like ghosts. Inside, the truth about Elias Ward had settled over them. Heavy, complicated, and dangerous. Charlotte had saved a man with enemies, a man with power, a man whose survival would change her life in ways she could not imagine. But danger was already moving across the prairie, drawn to the pulse of his survival, and it was coming for them far sooner than she thought. The following days passed with a deceptive calm, the kind of quiet that settles just before the earth shifts beneath one's feet. Elias was healing faster than Charlotte expected for a man who had been so close to death. Strength returned to his voice, some color filled his cheeks, and one evening she walked in to find him standing, leaning heavily on the bed frame, yes, but standing nonetheless. He looked like a man readying himself for the world again. But Charlotte sensed it long before it happened. Danger did not simply give up. Not for men like Elias Ward, and certainly not for the Connell brothers, whose greed was as vast as the plains themselves. She first noticed signs on a cold morning just after sunrise. Daniel had gone to gather wood when he came running back, breathless. "Mama," he gasped, "there's tracks. Big ones. Not cattle. Horses. Lots of them. They came from the east." Charlotte's heart lurched. She followed him outside, snow crunching beneath her boots. The tracks cut across the edge of her land, looping dangerously close to the tree line. Several horses. Not one, not two. A group. A search party. She knew that wasn't good. When she returned to the cabin, Elias was already watching her with a grim expression. He had seen the fear in her face. "Tell me," he said. "Riders," she answered quietly. "Many, passing near the property." Elias's jaw clenched in a way she had seen only once before, when he first told her about the Connell brothers. He ran a slow hand across his beard. "They found the site where they left me," he murmured. "They realized I survived. And now they're looking," Charlotte whispered. "For me," Elias said. Then his eyes lifted to hers, piercing and heavy. "And anyone who might have helped me." The implication struck her like a cold knife. Her family, her children, her home. She had done a noble thing, but in doing so she had stepped into a war she never asked for. Charlotte steadied herself. "We will protect the children." Elias nodded, but she could see the guilt tightening his throat. "I've brought danger to you. I never wanted—" "You didn't bring danger," she cut in firmly. "Those men brought danger, and you were the victim of it. Don't blame yourself." Her words softened him, even if only slightly. But warnings were one thing. The danger itself was another. Just before dusk that very same day, Charlotte heard it, the distant rumble of hooves. Slow, deliberate. The kind of ride men take when they are not passing through, but aiming for something. Every muscle in her body tensed. Elias, though still weak, pushed himself to the window. "They're coming." Charlotte didn't panic. She acted. "Daniel, take Gracie and your grandmother to the root cellar," she ordered. "Stay quiet. Stay hidden." Her son didn't argue. He had his father's instincts. Within seconds, he was gathering his sister's hand, guiding Margaret's arm, leading them into the earth beneath the cabin where food stores were kept. Charlotte barred the cellar door with a wooden plank and covered it with sacks. When she stepped back into the main room, Elias was gripping the side of the table for balance, his breath heavy from the exertion. He'd found her late husband's shotgun, leaning it against the wall like a reluctant soldier. "You can't fight in this condition," she said. "I don't intend to," Elias answered. "But if they come in shooting, I won't let harm touch you." The words struck her deeply, not because of their fierceness, but because of the sincerity behind them. A man half dead days ago now stood ready to defend a home that was not his, for a family he barely knew. Charlotte pulled the curtains tight. The hooves grew louder, closer. Then, stillness. A voice rang out outside, sharp and mocking. "Lovely little cabin you've got here. Anyone home?" Charlotte froze. She hadn't expected them to speak. Elias closed his eyes as though he recognized the voice. "That's Lester Connell," he whispered. "One of the brothers. One of the men who had ordered him killed." Charlotte inhaled slowly, steadying her courage like she'd done 1,000 times since she became a widow. She walked to the door, but didn't open it. "What do you want?" she called. A chuckle outside. "Heard a man went missing a few days ago. Poor fella. We're just looking for him. Thought maybe he wandered this way." Charlotte's pulse hammered, but she kept her voice calm. "Only people here are my family." "What about the tracks?" the man shot back. "Fresh ones leading to your place." "My boy's been out gathering wood," she lied. Silence. Then a second voice, meaner, rougher. "Open the door." We don't like talkin' to wood. Elias's eyes flashed. He shook his head at her urgently, whispering, "Don't." Charlotte steadied herself. "This is my home. My children are inside. I won't open my door to armed men." That earned a slow, ominous laugh. "Lady, we weren't askin'." Bootsteps crunched in the snow as two men dismounted. Elias grabbed the shotgun. His face had gone pale, but his grip did not tremble. "If they break in," he said quietly, "stay behind me." But the door never broke. Instead, a heavy knock sounded. 3 booming, deliberate strikes that rattled the hinges. Charlotte felt fear claw at her throat, but she did not open the door. She stepped closer, lifted her chin, and forced strength into her voice. "Leave," she said, "or I'll shoot through this door." Silence. Then a slow, furious drawl. "We'll be back, widow, and when we return, you better pray to God that the man we're looking for ain't under your roof." Hooves pounded the earth again, fading, retreating. They were gone, for now. Charlotte exhaled shakily. Elias's shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He sank into the chair, face drained of color. "You protected me," he breathed. Charlotte turned to him with fierce resolve. "I protected my home." But Elias looked at her with something deeper, something that said he knew the risk she had taken, knew she had stood between him and death once again. Something that said he would never forget it. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the frozen land. Danger had come to her door, and it would return. Which meant the next step was no longer about surviving winter. It was about preparing for war. The Connell brothers' threat lingered in the air long after their horses disappeared over the ridge. Night settled heavy on the cabin, the quiet far too sharp, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Charlotte checked the roof cellar, bringing Daniel, Gracie, and Margaret back into the house, comforting them even as fear clawed its way up her own ribs. But fear alone would not save them. Plan, prepare, protect. Those were the words Charlotte repeated to herself as she moved through the dark cabin, lighting more lanterns, checking the windows, stoking the fire. Elias watched her silently from his chair, his face pale from pain, but his eyes unwavering. "You need to take the children and leave," Elias said at last. Charlotte turned sharply. "Absolutely not." "They don't know I'm alive," he insisted. "But if they suspect you helped me—" "They already do," Charlotte interrupted. "Running now would only prove it." Elias clenched his jaw, guilt shadowing his features. "Then I should leave." Charlotte stared at him, this wounded man who could barely walk, who would die within a mile if he tried to flee through the snow. "You step outside this house right now," she said softly, "and they will finish what they started. I will not let that happen." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surrender, but resolve. "I'll stay," he said, "until this is finished." Charlotte nodded. Strange as it was, she felt safer with him there. Not because he could fight, not yet, but because he cared enough to try. The next 2 days were spent preparing. Elias healed enough to stand without support and walk short distances. Charlotte helped him rewrap his bandages and hammered nails back into loose window frames. Daniel gathered stones to reinforce the cellar entrance. Even Margaret, despite her frail hands, mended torn blankets and stacked jars neatly so nothing would spill if they had to hide again. Elias used those days to teach Daniel how to load the small rifle Joseph had once used for hunting. He showed Charlotte how to reinforce a door with 2 beams instead of 1. He taught her where to stand if bullets pierced the walls, how to angle the shutters to see out without being seen in return. Charlotte absorbed it all. She did not like violence. She never had. But she liked the idea of her children harmed far less. And perhaps Elias saw the steel in her because he trusted her with every instruction, every tactic, every scrap of survival knowledge. It bonded them quietly, this preparation. Not as lovers, not even as friends yet, but as 2 souls standing between danger and the innocent. On the 3rd night, it happened. Daniel shook Charlotte awake, whispering urgently, "Riders, Mama, they're back." Elias was already struggling to his feet when Charlotte lit a lantern. Outside, dark shapes moved along the ridge. 4, maybe 5 men, their torches flickering like wicked stars. Charlotte pressed her children to the cellar once more, her voice low and steady, even as her heart thundered. "Stay quiet, not one sound. I'll come for you." She barred the door. Elias loaded the shotgun, his movements slow but determined. "You should hide with them. I'm not leaving you alone." A faint smile tugged at his mouth, admiration and disbelief mixed together. "You're a braver woman than any I've known." Charlotte didn't answer. She just moved to the door and listened. Hoofbeats approached. Closer. Closer. Then a fist slammed into the wood. "Widow!" a voice called. "We've come for answers." Charlotte breathed slowly, gripping the shotgun with both hands. Elias steadied himself behind her, leaning on the table for balance. "Go away," Charlotte called through the door. "My children are sleeping." "Not for long," a man snarled. "Open up." No. Silence. Then a violent kick rocked the door off its hinges, throwing splinters across the floor. Charlotte stumbled back, raising the shotgun. 3 men stormed inside. The same cruel eyes, the same sneering mouths. The leader laughed when he saw her trembling hands. "You really think you can stop us?" Charlotte didn't lower the gun. She stepped in front of Elias instinctively. "You will leave," she said, voice fierce, "or you will bleed." The man chuckled, but the amusement vanished the moment he spotted Elias standing weakly behind her. "Well, I'll be damned," he hissed. "The ghost lives." He reached for his pistol, but Elias moved faster than Charlotte believed possible. Despite the pain shooting through his body, he lunged forward and knocked the man's wrist aside just as he fired. The bullet tore through the cabin wall instead of her chest. Charlotte fired her own shot. The blast knocked another intruder backward, slamming him into the doorframe. Chaos erupted. Elias grappled with the leader, using his good leg to keep balance, punching with the precision of a man who had survived countless fights. Charlotte struck the 3rd intruder with the shotgun stock, swinging it like a club. The man stumbled, cursing, but the leader managed to break free long enough to raise his pistol again, this time at Charlotte. Elias didn't think. He threw himself between her and the gun. The shot fired. Elias grunted, staggering back as blood blossomed across his shoulder. Charlotte cried out, catching him before he fell. "That was a mistake," she growled. She slammed the shotgun into the leader's face, dropping him cold. The cabin fell silent, except for heavy breathing and the crackling fire. The remaining intruders fled into the night, dragging the injured with them. Their torches vanished across the dark plains. They would not return. Not broken, not humiliated, not after fearing the man they had failed to kill twice. Charlotte knelt beside Elias, her hands trembling as she pressed cloth to his wound. "You saved me," she whispered. Elias winced, but managed a pained smile. "Fair trade. You saved me first." Tears gathered in her eyes. Relief, gratitude, fear, all tangled together. "You can't leave now," she said softly. "Not like this." Elias shook his head weakly. "I'm not leaving." Charlotte met his gaze, and in that look, something changed between them. Something quiet. Something certain. By spring, Elias had healed fully, and one morning he arrived at Charlotte's cabin, not as a wounded stranger, but as a man with purpose. "I owe you more than a debt," he said. "You saved my life. You saved my future. And I want to save yours." He took her hand gently, reverently. "I want to take care of your children, of your land, of you. Come to my ranch, live under my protection, and my name, if you'll have it." Charlotte's breath caught, her heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and something warmer. "I don't need rescue," she whispered. Elias smiled softly. "No, but you deserve one anyway." And she knew then, not because he was wealthy, not because he was strong, not because he defeated the Connells, but because he stood between danger and her family without hesitation. That she trusted him. And trust, for a widow who thought her heart had died with her husband, was the greatest miracle of all. And after that spring, Charlotte Hale and her children rode with Elias Ward towards Bluff, a place that would become their forever home. And though Charlotte once believed she was the one who saved a dying rancher, the truth would echo for years. He rescued her family right back, forever.